Well, hi, and thank you all. Thank you not only just all for being here, but thank you all, and you probably aren't all aware, but for all being the recipients for saving many, many lives. And I'll go on to explain that a wee bit later. But firstly, let me tell you a wee bit about Henry. Henry, a gorgeous, absolutely stunning, brown-eyed, dark curly hair, absolutely adorable wee lad when he was born and grew up, and so athletic, was in all the clubs and scouts and every club you can imagine. He was born into a family. He had two siblings, his mum and his dad. Well, they both worked, and just a beautiful family. They all done the clubs, but his main speciality, though, he absolutely thrived and worked so hard. He was a fabulous swimmer. Now, if you've got any swimming mums or dads in the audience, you'll know how much commitment that takes to be up early and all that traveling that they do for swimming leets all over the country, actually. But they were devoted, absolutely devoted, to ensure that their son was able to take part in all that he done. And that he did. He was so athletic. He used to do some cross country, and he was just really energetic. And, well, that was up until he was 16 years old. At 16, his parents were informed that Henry would die. Henry would die if a heart didn't become available. They had discovered that he had a heart disease. And although they would medicate and make do and mend with the heart equipment that was there, ultimately he would need a heart transplant. Well, not having ever thought about this before, his family were absolutely devastated. You can only imagine they only had the run-of-the-mill colds and flus and the chicken pox and the measles. They had all this throughout their families' lives, and not having dealt with this was major. They researched all that they could research. They phoned and spoke to all that they could phone and speak to try and find ways and methods of trying to make their young lad better again. Whilst awaiting for that heart, Henry started to deteriorate. Well, his life actually started to deteriorate, and obviously his clubs had ceased and his life was non-existent, really. He took a stroke, awaiting for that phone to ring, awaiting for someone else to die to enable him to live. His parents felt so guilty. They felt so guilty at thinking some other poor family has got to be devastated to enable us, to make us feel happy, to allow our son to continue on with his life. They felt terrible. They felt really bad because they wanted this to happen so much, willing for this to happen. Because ultimately, you are waiting on someone else to die. That day did come. Henry was fitted with that new heart. And after much and many, many months rehabilitation, he got stronger, and he still had the weakness that he'd had from the stroke, but still was able to recuperate and get better. He was able to live. Henry is now 30 years of age and now back at college and now studying to be a baker. And if you ask Henry now to date, what was it you missed out of life? He would always say to you that he missed all his friends growing up. He missed everybody that he'd been at school with, he'd been at nursery with, who he'd been at the swimming club with. They had all moved on in their lives. They had all moved on, got married, moved on with lives. He was left out. He was left in hospital or rehabilitating. He's lonely. But he is still so grateful to be living here and to have the preciousness of someone else's heart beating within his body. And that somebody else, some other family, had to go through that devastation to allow him. So he's well aware of the opportunity that he's been given. So he is making absolutely every moment count. And that he does. And my part within it all was that way back in 2011, I ran to be a member of the Scottish Parliament. And that I did. I was elected to be the member of the Scottish Parliament for Glasgow region. And whilst there, I was elected and selected to be the Shadow Minister for Europe and Democracy and International Development. Me being me, it still wasn't enough to satisfy what I wanted to do. I'm a community worker to trade, and I wanted to do something meaningful for not just a party political issue. I wanted to do something meaningful for families, for individuals, for communities that would mean something. So that I did. I was approached to take up the mantle, shall we say, to bring the organ donation transplantation bill to the floor of the Parliament. So in doing so, in true community development fashion, I travelled up and down the length and breadth of the UK, not just in Scotland, although in Scottish Parliament we can only legislate for Scottish issues. However, I wanted to find out all that was going on round about us. I wanted to find out what was happening down in England. I wanted to find out what was happening in Ireland. We sought research from Spain and all the different areas that were performing in organ donation, because obviously organ donation, transplantation, it hits everyone. It affects every country. It affects everyone that's here today. So it's a huge part of every government. So I researched it all, obviously with a huge team as well that I had to support me. But I trekked all the way through the UK, asking people. But what I was always clear of and always emphasised, there will always be people here that most certainly will not ever want to have their organs donated. And I was always, hands up, keysies, yes, you're entitled for that to happen. You are entitled to your say. It's a free country. You are entitled for that to happen. So within the bill that I was putting together, I always ensured that it would be put together, locked aside, that there would be a stronger emphasis on if you did not want any of your family to be approached, if you had passed away in a car accident or you'd passed away wherever, your family would not want to be approached. Your family will not be approached. It's made it safer. It's made it safer for those people who will never. I also researched all the religious elements of it. People hid behind religion on a lot of these values and a lot of these issues. There isn't a religious book that's within the world that talks about organ donation transplantation and says that it's wrong. There isn't. I've looked. Anyway, taking us back. The stark figures that were sticking clearly in my head. And for yourselves, 6,000 people a day are sitting here in the UK waiting on an organ. Now, whether that be a heart, a lung, a kidney, it involves people being held in hospitals, being on kidney dialysis, being monitored, not having them fulfill their full life. 6,000 people daily. Now, to put that into perspective, not everybody that's going to die today, not everybody that dies, organs is able to be used. So the medics do their bit. I'm not a medic and won't ever claim to be. So they do their bit. But that just lets you understand how many families are being disrupted, how many families are being devastated here, right now. I brought the bill to the floor of the Parliament, and that was after. Obviously, you can only imagine, and quite rightly so, there's a rigor process for to take a bill through Parliament. Quite rightly so. Oh, I fought like a dog. I fought because every time that I was there, I involved all of the people, all of the families that I tried to hear from all the families, and not only the families who were awaiting for an organ transplant, but for the families who had a family member who had donated, who had passed away, and they had donated an organ to someone else. I had spoken to them. They were involved in all the work that I had put into bringing this bill to the floor of the Parliament. They were all there. They were all behind me. They were just absolutely amazing, even though their hearts were breaking. They were there. We actually, the front cover of one of the newspapers where we had sat out small crosses of the amount of deaths that there would be that day. It was all just for people to recognise, put it straight in their own minds what we were dealing with here. The day that the bill was to go to Parliament, it was beat. It was beat. It was beat by 3 votes. 3 votes. 3 promised votes, shall I say? 3 promised votes. But there also, not that I'm still bitter, but anyway, there also was a promise from the government at the time that the bill would be brought back in the first sitting of Parliament. So they weren't going to do it at that time. However, they were They gave me that full guarantee that this bill was going to be part of their parliamentary business, shall we say. They would see that as priority. And they would know by this time, as vicious as I was back then, that I would be watching, keeping a watchful eye on for this to come back to the floor of the Parliament. So on March 2021, yes, it's now here. So whenever I welcomed you all and thanked you all for being part of this, it was because the opt-out system of organ donation is now in force. It's now in force. If you do not want your organs to be donated whenever you pass away, if you're hurt, you're injured, you die, please ensure that you speak to a relative, that you sign that from your doctor's records, that you do not want that to happen, because unless you do, because that's what will happen. So it's an opt-out system. So I was here today to thank you all for being part of Heart of the Matter and saving and giving people the hope, the strength, the courage. It's just the hope. Thank you. Thank you all for being at the heart of the matter.